Sometimes the most extraordinary people hide in the most ordinary places. In a world where we judge by appearances, where designer suits command respect and dirty overalls invite dismissal, the most powerful individuals often walk among us unrecognized. This is the story of Marcus Rodriguez, a man whose grease-stained hands had once held the fate of nations, whose quiet demeanor masked a lifetime of service that most could never imagine. What happens when a small-town garage becomes the stage for a moment that reveals the true meaning of honor? When a chance encounter strips away assumptions and exposes the heart of what it means to serve? Some revelations change everything in an instant, turning contempt into respect, ignorance into understanding, and proving that heroes don't always wear uniforms. This is that story. This is the moment when everything changed. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty parking lot of Rodriguez Auto Repair, a small garage nestled between a laundromat and a convenience store on the outskirts of Millbrook, Texas. The building itself was nothing special, weathered brick walls and a faded sign that had seen better days. But for Marcus Rodriguez, this place represented something more than a business. It was his sanctuary, his way of finding peace in a world that had once demanded everything from him. Marcus wiped his hands on a well-worn rag, the fabric already stained with years of automotive fluids and honest work. At 52, his weathered face told stories of long days under the sun, but his steady hands and sharp eyes revealed the precision that had made him legendary in circles most people would never know existed. His graying hair was always slightly disheveled, and his coveralls bore the permanent marks of his trade. To anyone passing by, he was just another small-town mechanic trying to make an honest living. The bell above the garage door chimed as the first customer of the day arrived. Mrs. Bagnosera Henderson, an elderly woman who had been bringing her ancient Buick to Marcus for the past 5 years, shuffled in with a worried expression. Her car had been making strange noises again, and at her age, every mechanical problem felt like a potential disaster. "Morning, Mrs. Henderson," Marcus called out, emerging from beneath the hood of a pickup truck. His voice was calm and reassuring, the kind of tone that immediately put people at ease. "What's troubling the Buick today?"
The old woman's face brightened at his warm greeting.
In a world where customer service often felt impersonal and rushed, Marcus treated every person who walked into his garage like family. He listened carefully as she described the rattling sound that had started 3 days ago, asking detailed questions and nodding thoughtfully as she spoke. "Don't you worry about it," Marcus said after examining the engine. "It's just a loose belt tensioner. I can have it fixed in about an hour, and it won't cost you more than $40. His honesty was refreshing in an industry known for overcharging and unnecessary repairs. Mrs. Henderson had learned to trust him completely, just like dozens of other customers who had discovered that Marcus Rodriguez was a man of his word. As the morning progressed, the garage filled with the familiar sounds of productivity, the rhythmic clanking of tools, the hiss of compressed air, and the steady hum of diagnostic equipment created a symphony that Marcus found deeply satisfying. This was his element, working with his hands to solve problems and help people. It was simpler than his previous life, but infinitely more peaceful. Around noon, a convoy of 3 black SUVs pulled into the parking lot, their tinted windows and government plates immediately drawing attention from the few customers waiting in the small office area. The vehicles were pristine, a stark contrast to the humble surroundings of the garage. From the lead SUV emerged a group of men in expensive suits, their bearing and alert expressions marking them as federal agents or military personnel in civilian clothes. The leader of the group was a tall, imposing figure with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention even in casual clothes. Agent David Morrison had spent 25 years with various government agencies, and his current assignment had brought him to this small Texas town, following a lead that seemed almost too incredible to believe. "Are you Marcus Rodriguez?" Morrison asked as he approached the garage, his tone professional but not unfriendly. Marcus looked up from the transmission he was working on, taking in the formal appearance of his unexpected visitors. In his experience, men in suits rarely brought good news to places like this. "Depends on who's asking," he replied calmly, setting down his wrench but remaining alert. "Agent Morrison, Department of Homeland Security," the man said, showing his credentials. "We need to ask you some questions about your background." The other customers in the garage began to take notice of the unusual situation unfolding. Word spread quickly in small towns, and the arrival of federal agents at the local garage was certain to be the talk of Millbrook by evening. Some customers stepped outside to get a better look, while others pretended to read magazines while straining to overhear the conversation. Marcus remained calm, though those who knew him well might have noticed the slight tension in his shoulders. He had been expecting this day for years. knowing that his past would eventually catch up with him, despite his efforts to live quietly. "What kind of questions?" he asked, wiping his hands on his coveralls. Morrison gestured toward the office area, clearly preferring to conduct their conversation away from curious onlookers. "It would be better if we could speak privately. This concerns some activities from your military service." The mention of military service caused several customers to exchange surprised glances. Marcus had never spoken about his past in the military, always deflecting questions with modest responses about serving his country and wanting to move on with civilian life. Most people in town assumed he had been a regular soldier, perhaps serving a standard enlistment before returning home to start his business. As they moved toward the office, Tommy Martinez, a young mechanic who worked part-time for Marcus while attending community college, watched the proceedings with growing concern. Tommy had worked for Marcus for 2 years and had developed a deep respect for his boss. The older man had taken him under his wing, teaching him not just about automotive repair, but about life, responsibility, and the value of hard work. The idea that Marcus might be in some kind of trouble was deeply troubling to the young man. Inside the cramped office, surrounded by automotive manuals and customer invoices, Morrison and his team began their questioning. They asked about specific dates and locations, missions and operations that Marcus hadn't discussed with anyone in over a decade. Each question brought back memories he had worked hard to bury, images of desert landscapes and dangerous assignments that seemed like another lifetime. "Rodriguez," Morrison said, consulting a thick file folder. "According to our records, you served with distinction in several classified operations between 1995 and 2008. Your commanding officers describe you as one of the most capable soldiers they ever worked with." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the small office suddenly feeling even smaller. "I did my job, same as anyone else. That was a long time ago. Your file indicates otherwise," Morrison continued. "Multiple commendations, leadership positions, and some of the most elite units in the military. You weren't just any soldier, Mr. Rodriguez. You were special operations." Outside the office, the atmosphere in the garage had grown tense. Regular customers who had come in for routine maintenance found themselves caught up in what appeared to be a serious federal investigation. Some began to question whether they really knew the quiet mechanic who had been fixing their cars for years. Henderson, still waiting for a Buick to be repaired, approached Tommy with a worried expression. "Is Marcus in some kind of trouble?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tommy shook his head, though his own concern was evident. "I don't know, Mrs. Head." Henderson. "But whatever this is about, I'm sure Marcus hasn't done anything wrong. He's the most honest person I know." The investigation continued for over an hour, with Morrison's team asking increasingly specific questions about operations, personnel, and classified materials. Marcus answered truthfully, but provided only the minimum information necessary, a habit ingrained from years of dealing with sensitive intelligence matters. Finally, Morrison closed the file folder and leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Rodriguez, we're not here because you're in trouble. Quite the opposite, actually. We're here because we need your help." The revelation caught Marcus off guard. After years of living quietly, avoiding any contact with his former life, the last thing he had expected was a request for assistance. "What kind of help?" he asked cautiously. Morrison glanced at his colleagues before responding. "There's a situation developing that requires someone with your specific skill set and experience. Someone who can operate independently and has the trust of local communities. We know you've been out of the game for a while, but your country needs you again." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of what he was being asked. He had built a good life in Millbrook, earning the respect and trust of his neighbors through honest work and genuine care for others. The idea of returning to his former world, even temporarily, represented a risk to everything he had worked to build. "I appreciate the confidence," Marcus said finally, "but that part of my life is over. I'm just a mechanic now. I fix cars, not problems that require federal agents." Morrison nodded as if he had expected this response. "I understand your reluctance, Mr. Big Rodriguez, but sometimes circumstances require good people to step up, regardless of what they'd prefer to do. This isn't just about national security, it's about protecting innocent lives." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion outside the office. Through the window, they could see a group of well-dressed individuals arriving in luxury vehicles. The newcomers were clearly agitated about something, their voices raised in apparent frustration as they spoke with Tommy and the other customers. Marcus recognized the group immediately. Richard Blackwood, a wealthy businessman who owned several car dealerships in the region, had arrived with his usual entourage of assistants and advisors. Blackwood had been trying to buy Marcus's property for months, wanting to tear down the garage and build a modern service center as part of his expanding automotive empire. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Marcus said to Morrison, gesturing toward the window. "I have responsibilities here. People depend on this place, and there are others who would love to see it disappear." Morrison followed his gaze, taking in the scene outside. "Mr. Rodriguez, what we're asking you to do would only require a few weeks of your time, and it would be compensated appropriately. Enough to secure your business permanently and help a lot of people in this community."
The offer was tempting, but Marcus remained hesitant.
He had left his former life behind for good reasons, and the idea of returning to that world, even temporarily, brought back memories he preferred to keep buried. As he watched Blackwood arguing with his customers and employees, however, he couldn't help but feel protective of the life he had built and the people who had become his extended family. "I need time to think about it," Marcus said finally. Morrison nodded and handed him a business card. "That's all we can ask. But don't take too long, Mr. Tagmac Rodriguez. Time isn't on our side with this one." As the federal agents departed, leaving behind an atmosphere of curiosity and speculation, Marcus found himself facing questions from customers and employees who had never seen their quiet mechanic as anything more than a skilled automotive technician. The careful balance he had maintained between his past and present was beginning to shift, and he wasn't sure he could control the direction it would take. The days following the federal agent's visit brought an uncomfortable spotlight to Rodriguez Auto Repair. Word had spread through Millbrook like wildfire, with speculation ranging from reasonable to ridiculous. Some residents whispered about witness protection programs, while others suggested Marcus might be involved in some kind of international conspiracy. The truth, as it often is, was far more complex than anything the gossip mill could produce. Marcus tried to maintain his normal routine, arriving at the garage before dawn and working steadily through each day. But the familiar rhythm of his work was constantly interrupted by curious glances from customers and pointed questions from neighbors who had never shown much interest in his personal life before. The attention made him increasingly uncomfortable, reminding him why he had chosen anonymity over recognition when he left the military. Tommy Martinez noticed the change in his boss immediately. The older man, who had always been patient with questions and generous with his knowledge, had become withdrawn and distracted. Tools that were usually organized with military precision were left scattered across workbenches. Conversations that once flowed easily now felt forced and brief. "Boss, you okay?" Tommy asked during a quiet moment between customers. "You've been different since those government guys showed up." Marcus looked up from the engine he was rebuilding, his hands stained with grease and his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes the past has a way of catching up with you, even when you think you've left it behind," he said, his voice carrying a weight that Tommy had never heard before. The young mechanic wanted to press for more information, but something in Marcus's demeanor warned him to let the subject drop. Instead, he focused on his work, occasionally stealing glances at his mentor and wondering what secrets lay behind the man's quiet exterior. The situation became more complicated when Richard Blackwood arrived unexpectedly on Thursday afternoon, accompanied by his usual retinue of lawyers and business associates. The wealthy car dealer swept into the garage with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way, his expensive suit and polished shoes creating a stark contrast to the working-class environment around him. "Rodriguez," Blackwood called out, his tone carrying the dismissive authority of someone who viewed others as obstacles to be removed rather than people to be respected. "I heard you had some interesting visitors earlier this week. Federal agents, from what I understand." Marcus emerged from beneath a custom sedan, wiping his hands on a shop rag and fixing Blackwood with a steady gaze. "Mr. Blackwood, what can I do for you today?" "You can start by accepting reality," Blackwood replied, gesturing around the modest garage with obvious disdain. "This little operation of yours is clearly more trouble than it's worth. Whatever you're mixed up in with the government, it's going to bring unwanted attention to this neighborhood. My offer still stands, and given recent developments, you'd be wise to take it." The businessman's arrogance was palpable. His assumption that Marcus was somehow involved in criminal activity based solely on the visit from federal agents. It was the kind of prejudice Marcus had encountered before. The automatic suspicion that followed men who worked with their hands and didn't dress for boardroom meetings. "I'm not interested in selling," Marcus said calmly, though those who knew him well could detect the slight edge in his voice. "This garage serves the community, and it's going to continue serving the community." Blackwood's expression hardened, his practiced smile fading into something more threatening. "Let me be clear, Rodriguez. I've been patient with you, because I thought you were just another small business owner who didn't understand the bigger picture. But if you're involved in some kind of federal investigation, that changes things. I have connections in this town, influence that reaches into City Hall and beyond. I can make things very difficult for you. The threat hung in the air like the smell of motor oil, heavy and unmistakable. Several customers who had been waiting for their vehicles stopped their conversations to listen. Sensing the tension that had suddenly filled the garage, Tommy moved closer to Marcus, his young face showing a mixture of anger and concern. "Blackwood," Marcus said, his voice remaining level despite the provocation. "I think you should leave now. This is a private business and you're not welcome here." The wealthy businessman's face flushed with indignation. In his world, people didn't dismiss him so casually, especially not mechanics in dirty coveralls. "You're making a mistake, Rodriguez. A big one. When the federal heat comes down on this place, don't expect anyone in this town to stand with you. They'll throw you under the bus the moment it becomes convenient." As if summoned by the confrontation, the black SUVs returned to the parking lot. Agent Morrison emerged from the lead vehicle, with 2 colleagues, their timing so perfect it seemed almost orchestrated. Blackwood's confident demeanor faltered slightly as he recognized the federal agents, his legal team shifting nervously behind him.
Mr.
"Rodriguez," Morrison called out as he approached the garage. "We need to speak with you again. There have been some developments in the situation we discussed." Blackwood seized the opportunity to assert his perceived authority, stepping forward with the swagger of someone who believed his wealth and connections made him untouchable. "Agent Morrison, I presume?" "Richard Blackwood, Blackwood Automotive Group. I have significant business interests in this area, and I'm concerned about the federal activity surrounding this establishment. Perhaps we should discuss how this investigation might affect local commerce." Morrison barely glanced at the businessman, his attention focused entirely on Marcus. The dismissal was subtle but unmistakable, the kind of professional slight that immediately established the irrelevance of Blackwood's attempted intervention. "This is a matter of national security, sir," Morrison said without looking away from Marcus. "I'm afraid your commercial interests aren't relevant to our discussion." The rebuke stung, and Blackwood's face reddened with embarrassment and anger. He was accustomed to being the most important person in any room, to having officials and business people seek his approval and support. Being dismissed so casually by a federal agent in front of his own staff was humiliating. "Now see here," Blackwood began, but Morrison cut him off with a look that could have frozen motor oil. "Sir, you need to leave. This is official government business." The garage fell silent, except for the distant hum of the air compressor and the soft radio playing classic rock from the office. Customers and employees watched the drama unfold, sensing that they were witnessing something significant but not fully understanding the forces at play. Blackwood retreated with as much dignity as he could muster, but his parting words carried the venom of a man whose pride had been wounded. "This isn't over, Rodriguez, not by a long shot." As the businessman and his entourage departed, Morrison turned his full attention to Marcus. "We need to talk privately." The situation has become more urgent. They moved to the office again. But this time, Morrison's demeanor was noticeably more intense. He carried a tablet computer and several file folders, suggesting that new intelligence had developed since their last meeting. "Mr. Rodriguez, we've identified the target," Morrison began without preamble. "It's worse than we initially thought. The individual we're tracking has specific knowledge of your former operations and has made threats against civilian populations in this region." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The idea that his past might endanger the people he had come to care about was his worst nightmare made real. "What kind of threats?" "The specifics are classified, but I can tell you that this person has both the motivation and capability to cause significant harm. We believe he's using information gained from compromised operational files to target former Special Operations personnel and their families." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. During his years of service, he had made enemies, individuals who viewed him and his colleagues as obstacles to their criminal enterprises or terrorist goals. The possibility that one of these enemies had surfaced with detailed information about his current life was terrifying. "Why me specifically?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Morrison consulted his tablet before responding. "Because you're one of the few people with direct knowledge of this individual's operation and capabilities. You worked against him directly in 2006, and your testimony was instrumental in disrupting his network at that time." The memory came flooding back, unbidden and unwelcome. Operation Desert Shield had been one of Marcus's most difficult assignments, involving deep cover infiltration of a weapons smuggling network that had been supplying insurgent groups across the Middle East. The mission had taken 8 months to complete and had required him to assume the identity of a corrupt military contractor, gaining the trust of some very dangerous people. The mission's success had disrupted millions of dollars in illegal arms sales and led to the arrest of dozens of criminals and terrorists. But it had also earned Marcus some extremely dangerous enemies, including Alexander Petrov, a former Soviet military officer who had built a criminal empire dealing in weapons, drugs, and human trafficking. Petrov, Marcus said, the name tasting bitter in his mouth. Morrison nodded grimly. He was released from federal prison 6 months ago. Officially, he's been deported to Russia and is under surveillance by international intelligence services. Unofficially, he disappeared from monitoring 3 weeks ago, and we have credible intelligence that he's operating in North America. The implications were staggering. Petrov was not just dangerous because of his criminal connections and resources, but because he was highly intelligent and had intimate knowledge of American military and intelligence operations. During the original investigation, it had become clear that he had been recruiting assets within the US military and government, building a network of information sources that had made him nearly impossible to track. What does he want? Marcus asked, though he feared the answer. Revenge, Morrison replied simply. He blames you personally for the destruction of his organization and his imprisonment. Intelligence suggests he's been planning this for years, using his time in federal custody to develop detailed plans for retaliation against everyone involved in his capture. Outside the office, Tommy and the remaining customers pretended to focus on their own business while straining to overhear the conversation. The young mechanic was particularly troubled by the serious expressions he could see through the office window, and the way Marcus's posture had become increasingly tense as the meeting progressed. There's more, Morrison continued. We have reason to believe that Petrov has been gathering intelligence on your current life for months. He knows about your business, your employees, your regular customers. He's building a profile that would allow him to strike at you through the people you care about. The threat to innocent civilians was the final piece that shattered Marcus's resistance. He had been willing to walk away from his government's request for help, to risk whatever consequences might follow. But the idea that his past could endanger Mrs. Henderson, Tommy, or any of the other good people who had welcomed him into their community was intolerable. What do you need me to do? Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his mind. Morrison smiled for the first time since arriving. We need you to help us set a trap. Petrov wants to find you, and he's getting close. We can use that to our advantage, but it requires someone he'll recognize and trust long enough to make a mistake. You want me to be bait. We want you to be a predator, Morrison corrected. You know how he thinks, how he operates. With the right support and planning, you can turn his hunt into his downfall. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, weighing the risks against the potential benefits. The idea of returning to his former life, even temporarily, was deeply unsettling. But the alternative, allowing a dangerous criminal to threaten innocent people in pursuit of personal vengeance, was unacceptable. I'll need guarantees, Marcus said finally. Protection for my employees and customers, security for this business while I'm gone, and assurance that this won't follow me back here when it's over. Done, Morrison replied without hesitation. Whatever you need. As the two men shook hands, neither of them noticed the figure watching from across the street. A tall man with cold eyes and expensive clothes, who had been observing the garage for the past hour. Alexander Petrov had indeed been planning his revenge for years, and his surveillance network had finally provided him with the location of his primary target. The game was about to begin, and Marcus Rodriguez would soon discover that leaving his past behind had been far more difficult than he had ever imagined. The operation began at dawn on Monday morning, 3 days after Marcus had agreed to help the federal agents. The garage was closed for what he told customers was emergency maintenance on the building, but the reality was far more complex. Agent Morrison's team had transformed the modest repair shop into a sophisticated surveillance post, with hidden cameras and listening devices that could monitor the surrounding area for any sign of Petrov's approach. Marcus found himself caught between two worlds, his familiar coveralls replaced by tactical gear that felt both foreign and natural after years of civilian life. The muscle memory of his military training began to resurface as Morrison's team briefed him on their intelligence and operational plans. It was unsettling how quickly the old instincts returned, how easily he slipped back into the mindset of a soldier, despite his years as a peaceful mechanic. Petrov's been seen in Houston, Morrison reported, studying satellite imagery on his laptop. Our surveillance suggests he's moving this direction, probably using back roads to avoid major highways where he might be spotted. He's traveling with at least 3 associates, all of them armed and dangerous. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Marcus would resume normal operations at the garage, maintaining his usual routine while Morrison's team provided invisible security from concealed positions around the neighborhood. When Petrov made his move, they would be ready to capture him and dismantle whatever network he had built for his revenge operation. But plans, as Marcus knew from bitter experience, rarely survived contact with reality. The first sign of trouble came on Tuesday afternoon when Tommy arrived to his regular shift and immediately noticed something was wrong. The young mechanic had developed an intuitive understanding of his boss's moods and habits, and the subtle changes in Marcus's behavior were impossible to miss. "You're different," Tommy said as he pulled on his work gloves. "Not just distracted like before. You're alert, like you're expecting trouble." Marcus paused in his work on a customer's transmission, realizing that his attempts to maintain normalcy had failed to fool someone who knew him well. "Just being careful, Tommy. Sometimes it pays to be aware of your surroundings. This has something to do with those federal agents, doesn't it?" Tommy pressed, his concern evident. "And that rich guy who was here making threats. You're in some kind of danger." Before Marcus could respond, Mrs. Henderson arrived with her ancient Buick, which had developed a new problem despite the recent repairs. The elderly woman was one of Marcus's most loyal customers, and her presence immediately shifted the conversation away from dangerous topics. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Peter. Henderson," Marcus called out, forcing his voice to carry its usual warmth. "What's the Buick telling you today?" The old woman smiled, but her expression carried a hint of worry. "It's making a grinding sound when I brake, dear. And before you ask, yes, I've been driving it that way for 3 days because I was afraid to call you." "Afraid to call me?" Marcus was genuinely puzzled. "Mrs. Henderson, you never have to be afraid to call me. That's what I'm here for." "Well," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "people in town are saying all sorts of things about you since those government men came by. Some folks think you might be in witness protection or involved in something illegal. I don't believe a word of it, mind you, but it has me worried about what kind of trouble might be coming your way." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another customer, but this was made Marcus's blood run cold. A tall, well-dressed man with silver hair and cold blue eyes stepped out of a luxury sedan and approached the garage with the confident stride of someone accustomed to being in control. Alexander Petrov had aged well during his years in federal prison, his expensive suit and polished demeanor giving him the appearance of a successful businessman rather than a dangerous criminal. Only his eyes betrayed his true nature, carrying the calculating intelligence and barely contained violence that had made him so effective in his illegal enterprises. "Excuse me," Petrov said, his accent barely detectable after years of practice. "I'm having trouble with my vehicle. Perhaps you could assist me." Marcus felt his training kick in automatically, his body tensing as he recognized the threat standing just a feet away. Morrison's surveillance team would have identified Petrov the moment he arrived, but the criminal had chosen to approach openly, suggesting he had some kind of plan that didn't rely on stealth. "What seems to be the problem?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through his system. "The engine is making unusual sounds," Petrov replied, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "I was hoping someone with your particular expertise might be able to diagnose the issue." The emphasis on particular expertise made it clear that Petrov knew exactly who he was speaking to. This wasn't a chance encounter or a surveillance operation gone wrong. This was a direct confrontation, and Marcus realized that his enemy had no intention of hiding or running. Tommy sensed the tension immediately, his young instincts warning him that something was seriously wrong. He moved closer to Marcus, ready to offer support, even though he didn't understand the nature of the threat they were facing. "Maybe we should take a look at your car," Marcus said carefully, buying time while he assessed the situation and waited for Morrison's team to react. "That won't be necessary," Petrov replied, his polite facade beginning to slip. "I think we both know this isn't really about automotive repair." Mrs. Henderson, who had been listening to the exchange with growing confusion, finally spoke up. "Is there a problem here? Marcus, do you know this man?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, forcing both men to decide how far they were willing to escalate the confrontation in front of innocent civilians. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility for everyone in the garage, knowing that his past had brought danger to people who had done nothing to deserve it. "We knew each other a long time ago," Marcus said finally. "But that was a different life." Petrov smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. Indeed it was. A life where you cost me everything I had built, everything I had worked for. Do you have any idea what federal prison is like for someone like me, Marcus? What it's like to have your empire destroyed by one man's betrayal. The accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth. Marcus had indeed been instrumental in Petrov's downfall, but he had been serving his country and protecting innocent lives from the weapons and violence that Petrov's organization had spread across the world. I was doing my job, Marcus replied, his voice carrying the quiet conviction of a man who had made peace with difficult decisions. Just like I'm doing my job now. Your job, Petrov repeated, gesturing around the modest garage with obvious contempt. Hiding among these simple people, pretending to be something you're not. Do they have any idea who you really are? What you've done? Tommy stepped forward, his young face flushed with anger. I don't know what your problem is, mister, but Marcus is the best man I know. He's helped everyone in this neighborhood, and he's taught me more about life than my own father ever did. The young mechanic's words seemed to surprise Petrov, who had clearly expected to find Marcus isolated and vulnerable. Instead, he was discovering that his target had built genuine relationships based on trust and mutual respect. How touching, Petrov said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. But sentiment won't protect any of you from the consequences of his past. That was when Agent Morrison and his team finally made their move. The garage suddenly filled with federal agents, their weapons drawn and their voices sharp with authority, as they ordered everyone to remain calm and stay where they were. Alexander Petrov, Morrison called out, his weapon trained on the criminal. You're under arrest for violation of your parole terms, conspiracy to commit terrorist acts, and multiple counts of threatening federal witnesses. Petrov raised his hand slowly, his expression showing no surprise at the sudden appearance of the federal agents. Agent Morrison, I presume. I was wondering when you would make your entrance. You knew we were here? Morrison asked, clearly caught off guard by Petrov's calm reaction. Of course, Petrov replied, his confidence returning. Did you really think I would walk into your trap without preparation? My associates are currently in position around this building, and they have orders to eliminate everyone inside if I don't walk out of here in exactly 10 minutes. The revelation sent a chill through everyone in the garage. Mrs. Henderson gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she realized she had walked into a dangerous situation. Tommy moved protectively toward Marcus, while the federal agents began speaking rapidly into their communication devices. You're bluffing, Morrison said, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty. Petrov checked his expensive watch and smiled. 8 minutes and 30 seconds, Agent Morrison. I suggest you use the time wisely. Marcus felt the familiar weight of command responsibility settling on his shoulders. In situations like this, when innocent lives hung in the balance, leadership wasn't about rank or authority. It was about making the hard decisions that others couldn't or wouldn't make. Let them go, Marcus said, stepping forward despite Morrison's protests. Mrs. Henderson, Tommy, or the civilians. This is between Petrov and me. Absolutely not, Morrison replied. We're not negotiating with terrorists. You're not, Marcus said calmly. I am. Tommy grabbed Marcus's arm, his young face showing fear for the first time since the confrontation began. I'm not leaving you here, boss. Whatever this is about, we face it together. The loyalty in the young man's voice was matched by Mrs. Benedgery. Henderson, who despite her fear moved closer to Marcus rather than toward the exit. I don't understand what's happening here, but I know you're a good man, Marcus. I'm not abandoning you now. Their support was both heartwarming and terrifying, proof that Marcus had indeed built something meaningful in his civilian life, but also evidence that his past had endangered people who deserved better. 6 minutes, Petrov announced, his calm demeanor becoming increasingly unsettling. That's when the sound of approaching helicopters began to fill the air, followed by the distant rumble of heavy vehicles. Through the garage windows, they could see military trucks and armored personnel carriers taking positions around the building. Morrison smiled for the first time since the confrontation began. It seems your associates have encountered some unexpected resistance, Mr. Petrov. The criminal's confident expression faltered slightly as the magnitude of the federal response became clear. He had planned for a small tactical team, not the overwhelming show of force that was now surrounding the area. Who authorized this level of response? Petrov demanded, his carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. Someone who knows exactly who Marcus Rodriguez really is. came a new voice from the garage entrance. Everyone turned to see a tall, imposing figure in full military dress uniform striding through the doorway. Colonel James Mitchell wore the insignia of a SEAL team commander, his bearing and presence immediately commanding respect from everyone in the room. The moment Colonel Mitchell's eyes found Marcus, he snapped to attention and delivered a crisp military salute. "Command Master Chief Rodriguez, it's an honor to serve with you again, sir." The salute hung in the air like a revelation, transforming everything everyone thought they knew about the quiet mechanic. Tommy's mouth dropped open in shock. Mrs. Henderson gasped in amazement, and even Agent Morrison looked surprised by the level of respect being shown to his asset. "At ease, Colonel," Marcus replied automatically, his own posture unconsciously shifting into the bearing of a senior military leader. "Though, I think you have me at a disadvantage. I retired from active duty years ago." "With respect, sir," Colonel Mitchell said, maintaining his formal tone, "men like you never really retire. They just choose different ways to serve their country." The colonel's attention turned to Petrov, whose confident demeanor had completely evaporated in the face of this unexpected development. "Mr. Petrov, I believe you underestimated exactly who you were dealing with. Command Master Chief Rodriguez isn't just any former soldier. He's a legend in the special operations community, a man whose service and sacrifice saved countless American lives." As if choreographed, every federal agent and military personnel in the garage snapped to attention and saluted Marcus, their respect and admiration obvious in their bearing. The transformation was complete and stunning, the humble mechanic revealed as one of the most decorated and respected warriors in American military history. Tommy stood frozen, his young mind struggling to process the revelation that his mentor and boss was not just a former soldier, but a genuine American hero. Mrs. Henderson wiped tears from her eyes, finally understanding why Marcus had always carried himself with such quiet dignity and strength. "Command Master Chief Rodriguez," Colonel Mitchell continued, "on behalf of the United States Navy and the Special Operations community, I want to thank you for your continued service to our nation. Your willingness to help capture this terrorist, despite the risks to your personal safety, exemplifies the warrior spirit that made you legendary." Petrov, faced with the overwhelming evidence of Marcus's true identity and the massive federal response to his threats, finally surrendered without further resistance. As he was led away in handcuffs, he turned back to Marcus one final time. "I researched you for months," Petrov said, his voice carrying a mixture of hatred and grudging respect. "I thought I was hunting a mechanic hiding from his past. I had no idea I was hunting a ghost." As the garage gradually returned to normal, with federal agents and military personnel clearing the area, Marcus found himself surrounded by customers and neighbors who had witnessed the extraordinary events. Word had already begun to spread through the town, carried by those who had seen the military response and the respectful salutes given to their local mechanic. Tommy approached his boss with a new understanding and even deeper respect. "All this time, I thought I was learning about cars from you, but you were teaching me about honor, weren't you? About what it means to serve others even when nobody knows who you really are." "Mrs. Page," Henderson took Marcus's grease-stained hand in both of hers, her eyes bright with emotion. "You saved our lives today, didn't you? Just like you've been taking care of all of us for years, without ever asking for recognition or thanks." Marcus looked around at the faces of the people who had become his extended family. Seeing, understanding, and respect, where once there had been casual familiarity. His secret was out, but instead of losing the quiet life he had built, he had gained something even more valuable. The knowledge that true honor didn't require recognition, and that service to others was its own reward. Colonel Mitchell approached as the last of the federal agents departed. "Sir, if you ever decide you want to come back to active duty, the Special Operations community would welcome you with open arms." Marcus smiled, wiping his hands on his coveralls and looking around at his garage, his customers, and his community. "Thank you, Colonel, but I think I'm exactly where I need to be. Serving my country doesn't always require a uniform." As the sun set over Millbrook, Texas, Rodriguez Auto Repair returned to its normal operations. But everything had changed. The quiet mechanic who had earned respect through honest work and genuine care for others had been revealed as a true American hero, a man whose service and sacrifice had protected the nation while he humbly fixed cars and changed lives in a small Texas town. The dismissive businessman Richard Blackwood, who had threatened and belittled Marcus just days before, would soon discover that the modest garage he had tried to destroy was now under the unofficial protection of some of the most powerful people in the military and intelligence communities. His development plans would quietly disappear, replaced by a sudden desire to find investment opportunities far from Millbrook. And in the weeks that followed, As the story spread through the special operations community and beyond, Rodriguez Auto Repair would become an unofficial pilgrimage site for military personnel who wanted to shake the hand of a living legend who had chosen service over recognition, community over glory, and humble work over celebrity. Marcus Rodriguez had learned that you can never truly leave your past behind, but sometimes, if you're fortunate, your past can enhance rather than destroy the life you've built. In serving others without seeking recognition, he had found the highest form of honor. And in the salutes of grateful warriors and the respect of his community, he had discovered that true heroism isn't about the battles you fight, but about the lives you touch along the way.